My name is Nia Coleman, and a few weeks ago, I turned 21. People like to call it a milestone birthday, one of those quiet markers you're supposed to remember years later. I didn't expect anything dramatic. No big party, no speeches. I just thought it would matter to my parents in some small, ordinary way. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps our channel grow and allows us to release new stories every single day. Looking back now, I can admit that expectation didn't come from reality. It came from habit. From hoping that this time would somehow be different, even though it almost never was. I grew up knowing exactly where I stood in my family. I wasn't invisible, but I was never the priority either. That spot belonged to my younger sister, Brielle. Everything in our house revolved around her. Her schedule came first. Her problems mattered more. If she wanted something, my parents found a way to make it happen. If she needed support, plans shifted without question. If I needed something, especially if it caused even a minor inconvenience, I learned to stop asking. I moved out a while ago, partly for independence and partly for sanity. Distance softened the sharp edges. I didn't see the favoritism every day anymore. Phone calls stayed surface level. Visits were polite and brief. It was easier to pretend things had improved when I wasn't around to see them. That's why I let myself hope. I woke up on my birthday with that quiet kind of optimism you don't admit out loud because you don't want to jinx it. Maybe a simple dinner, maybe a small cake, maybe just sitting together for once. Nothing big. Just acknowledgement. That morning, I sent a message to our family group chat. Hey, what time are we meeting for dinner tonight? I checked my phone more times than I want to admit. No reply. I tried to distract myself, telling myself they were busy. By early afternoon, that familiar heaviness settled in. The one that always came when expectations met reality. By 3 o'clock, my phone was still silent. I told myself maybe they were planning something. Even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew it wasn't true. Hope has a way of making you forget patterns you've seen your whole life. Eventually, I did what I always ended up doing. I called my mom. She answered quickly, sounding distracted but cheerful. Hey, Nia, what's going on? I hesitated. We're still doing dinner tonight, right? There was a pause. Just long enough. Oh, she said lightly. I should have mentioned that earlier. We're actually going out tonight with Brielle. My stomach tightened. You are? She has some exciting news, my mom continued, already moving on in her head. So we're taking her out to celebrate. I swallowed. It's my birthday. She laughed, not unkindly, worse than that, casually, like I'd said something mildly amusing. Nia, don't be so dramatic. We'll do something for you next weekend, okay? In the background, I heard my sister's voice. Is that Nia? Tell her we'll save her some leftovers. More laughter. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point out how familiar this all felt. I just said, yeah, sure, have fun, and hung up. I sat there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, feeling something settle in. Not sadness, not shock. Recognition. And that was the moment I decided to do something I had never done before. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I sat there on the edge of my bed, staring at the dark screen of my phone, feeling oddly calm. It wasn't peace, it was resignation. The kind that comes when something finally confirms what you've known all along. This wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't bad timing, it was a choice. I thought about all the other birthdays that had quietly passed. The excuses. The, we'll make it up to you. The way celebrations for Brielle always seemed to appear effortlessly, while mine required reminders and patience and lowered expectations. I could have argued with my mom, I could have reminded her that turning 21 only happens once. I could have pointed out how hurtful it was, but experience had taught me something important. Explaining my pain to people who benefit from ignoring it never changes anything. I stood up and paced my apartment. The place was small, but it was mine. A couch I bought secondhand, a kitchen table that wobbled if you leaned too hard on it. Nothing fancy. Still, it felt safer than my childhood home ever had. I checked my bank balance out of habit. Not much there. Enough to get by. Enough to cover rent and groceries if I was careful. I hadn't planned to go out that night. I assumed I'd be having dinner with my parents. When that disappeared, so did my plans. I picked up my phone again and hesitated before calling someone else. My girlfriend, Zara. She answered immediately. "Hey, birthday girl. How's your day going?" That did it. My throat tightened. "Can we go out tonight?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "I don't really want to be alone." There was a brief pause, then softness. "Of course. Are you okay?" "I will be," I said. "I just don't want to sit with this by myself." "I'll be there in 10 minutes," she replied without hesitation. When Zara arrived, she didn't ask questions right away. She just hugged me. Long and firm and grounding, the kind of hug that doesn't try to fix anything, but somehow makes it easier to breathe. "Tell me," she said eventually. So I did. I told her about the group chat. The silence, the phone call, my mom's laugh, Brielle's comment about leftovers. Zara listened quietly, her jaw tightening more with every word. "That's not okay," she said when I finished. "None of that is okay." I shrugged. "It's not new." "That doesn't make it acceptable?" she replied. She thought for a moment, then smiled slightly. "Come with me. My parents are home, and they already asked what you wanted to do for your birthday." I hesitated. "I don't want to impose." "You're not," she said firmly. "They like you, and they actually mean it." That sentence stayed with me longer than I expected. We ended up at a small restaurant her parents loved. Nothing flashy. Warm lighting. Comfortable booths. The kind of place where people linger over conversation instead of rushing through meals. Her mom hugged me the moment we walked in. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said like it mattered. Her dad shook my hand, smiling. 21 is a big deal. First drink's on me." For the first time that day, something inside me loosened. Dinner was easy. Laughter, stories, questions about my work, about my plans, about things that had nothing to do with Brielle or expectations or disappointment. When the server brought out a small cake with a candle, I almost laughed from the absurdity of it. This was all I had wanted, not extravagance, just presence. After dinner, Zara suggested we take a picture. I normally avoided posting things online, but this time I didn't overthink it. I snapped a photo of the restaurant entrance, warm lights glowing behind us. Later that night, back at my apartment, I posted it. The caption was simple. "Grateful for my girlfriend and her family for making my birthday special. Thankful for the people who show up." I didn't tag anyone. I didn't name names. I didn't accuse or explain. I wasn't trying to make a statement, but apparently it made one anyway. Because less than an hour later, my phone started buzzing. The first message came from my mom. "What is this post, Nia?" I stared at the screen for a few seconds before locking my phone and setting it face down on the table. I already knew what was coming. The confusion wasn't real. Neither was the concern. What bothered her wasn't what she'd done. It was how it looked. A few seconds later, another notification. This time from my dad. "Are you serious right now?" I let out a quiet breath and leaned back on the couch. Zara was sitting beside me, scrolling through her phone. She glanced over when she heard the vibration again. "Your parents?" she asked. Yeah, I said. They saw the post? Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Already? I nodded. Apparently. The phone buzzed again. And again? A call this time. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear them pretend to be confused. Or worse, offended. I knew the script too well. First would come disbelief, then defensiveness, then anger. And somehow, by the end of it, I would be the one apologizing. I wasn't doing that tonight. Zara watched me carefully. You don't have to pick up. I know, I said. I just want to see how far they take it. As if on cue, another message came through. You're making us look bad, my mom wrote. There it was. Not, are you okay? Not, we're sorry. Just image control, reputation management. I felt something inside me harden. A minute later, my phone rang again. Same number. I let it ring until it stopped. Then it rang again. And again. They're persistent, Zara said dryly. They always are when they feel exposed, I replied. Eventually, I picked up. I kept my voice neutral. Hey, Mom. She launched into it immediately. What were you thinking, Nia? People are seeing that post. Your aunts have already called me asking questions. I just thanked the people who showed up for me, I said calmly. That's not the point, she snapped. It makes it look like we didn't care. I almost laughed. You didn't. That's not fair, she shot back. We had plans. We told you we'd celebrate later. You laughed, I said quietly. When I told you it was my birthday. There was a pause. Short, but noticeable. Then my dad's voice came on the line. You need to take the post down. I leaned back against the couch. Why? Because it's disrespectful, he said, and because you're airing family business online. I didn't mention anyone, I replied. I didn't say anything untrue. That's not the point, he repeated. People will assume things. I smiled faintly. They're assuming because the situation speaks for itself. His tone dropped. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being honest. Another pause. I could hear my mom whispering in the background, agitated. Then my dad said something that made my stomach tighten. We're coming over. I sat up. What? We're coming to talk in person, he said. This needs to be handled properly. I glanced at Zara. She was already shaking her head. I don't think that's a good idea, I said carefully. We're on our way, my mom said sharply. You can't just do this and hide. The call ended. Zara looked at me. They're actually coming? Apparently. She stood up. Then you're not dealing with them alone. I swallowed. Part of me wanted to ask her parents to leave, to spare them the discomfort. Another part of me knew that for once, I didn't want to retreat. For years, I had swallowed everything quietly. Tonight, I wasn't going to. About 20 minutes later, headlights flashed through the window. My parents had arrived. The doorbell rang once. Then again. Then rapidly, like whoever was on the other side didn't believe in waiting. Zara exhaled slowly. They're angry. I know, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Before I could move, Zara's father, Leon, stepped toward the door. He had been sitting quietly in the kitchen, giving us space, but clearly aware of everything happening. I'll get it, he said calmly. No need for shouting through doors. The moment the door opened, my mother walked in like she owned the place. Her posture was rigid, her jaw tight. My father followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. Nia, my mother said sharply. We need to talk. Now. I crossed my arms. You're talking. Her gaze flicked briefly to Zara's parents, then back to me. The irritation in her expression deepened. Not here. This is private. No, I said quietly. If you have something to say, you can say it here. My father clenched his jaw. Enough with the attitude. I raised an eyebrow. Attitude? You know exactly what you're doing, my mom snapped. Posting that online, making us look like terrible parents. I looked at her for a long moment before responding. You didn't look terrible because of a post. You looked terrible because of what you did. Her eyes widened, more from surprise than offense. She wasn't used to me pushing back. I usually smoothed things over. Apologized, made excuses for them. Not tonight. You had no right to embarrass us like that, she continued. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is for us? I nodded slowly. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for me to sit alone on my birthday while you laughed on the phone? Silence fell over the room. Zara's mother, Danielle, shifted slightly beside Leon but didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was grounding. My father stepped forward. We raised you, he said sternly. And this is how you repay us? I let out a small breath. You raised me to be quiet, to accept being second, to not make things uncomfortable for you. That's not true, my mom snapped. It is, I said evenly. And you know it. Her face flushed. This is because of her, isn't it? She glanced toward Zara. You're trying to replace us. Zara stiffened beside me, but I squeezed her hand gently. I'm not replacing anyone, I said. I just stopped begging. My dad scoffed. You're being dramatic. No, I replied. I'm being honest for the first time. My mom's voice dropped, sharp and controlled. You're taking that post down. I shook my head. No. His eyes narrowed. You don't get to decide that. I already did, I said. The room felt tight, charged. My parents weren't used to losing control of the conversation. They thrived on guilt, on authority, on the idea that I would eventually fold. My mom took a step closer. You're going to regret this, Nia. I tilted my head slightly. Regret what? Telling the truth? Or finally standing up for myself? My father opened his mouth to respond, but Leon spoke first. His voice was calm, firm, unshakable. I think it's time for you two to leave. My mother stared at him, stunned. My father looked furious. This is family business, my mom said coldly. Leon didn't raise his voice. Not in my home. For a moment, no one moved. Then my dad muttered something under his breath and turned toward the door. My mom followed, shooting me one last look filled with anger and disbelief. This isn't over, she said. I met her gaze without flinching. I know. The door closed behind them. The silence afterward felt heavy, but different. Not suffocating. Clear. For the first time in my life, I realized something important. They didn't leave because they won. They left because they had nothing left to say. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Zara let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. Well, she said softly. That was a lot. I nodded, still standing in the same spot, my arms crossed more out of habit than defense now. My heart was racing, but underneath that rush was something unfamiliar. Relief. Zara's parents didn't rush in with questions or commentary. Leon simply went back to the kitchen, and Danielle gave me a gentle look before following him. They understood something my parents never had, that sometimes support means giving someone space to process what just happened. I sank down onto the couch. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with me. Zara sat beside me and took my hand. You okay? I think so, I said. I paused, searching for the right words. I don't feel good, but I don't feel wrong either. She nodded. That makes sense. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. My parents' words replayed in my head. You're going to regret this. They had said that before. Not always with those exact words, but the message was familiar. Every time I set a boundary. Every time I chose myself. Regret was their favorite threat. But as I sat there, I realized something else. The regret they warned me about was never about my happiness. It was always about their loss of control. My phone buzzed again. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Another message from my mom. You've gone too far. We didn't raise you to be this ungrateful. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. For years, I would have typed a long explanation, an apology, something to smooth it over. This time, I locked the phone and set it down. I'm not responding, I said quietly. Zara smiled. Good. We sat there for a while, letting the tension drain out of the room. Eventually, Danielle came back in with 2 glasses of water and set them on the table without a word. The normalcy of the gesture grounded me more than any advice could have. Later that night, after we said our goodbyes and Zara walked me back to my apartment, I lay awake in bed, staring at the dark. My birthday had ended in a way I never could have predicted, not with cake or candles, but with clarity. I finally understood that my parents weren't angry because I had lied. They were angry because I had stopped covering for them. I had stopped absorbing the discomfort so they wouldn't have to. And once you see that dynamic clearly, you can't unsee it. Sometime after midnight, my phone buzzed again. A new message, this one from my dad. If you don't take that post down, there will be consequences. I read it twice. Slowly. Consequences. I thought about my life now, my job, my apartment, the people who actually showed up for me. The fact that I no longer lived under their roof, no longer relied on them financially, no longer needed their permission to exist. For the first time, the word didn't scare me. I typed back a single sentence. I'm not taking it down. Then I turned my phone off. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something that changed everything. They didn't have power over me anymore. I woke up the next morning expecting to feel anxious, that familiar tightness in my chest, the urge to check my phone, to brace myself for whatever message my parents might have sent overnight. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, cutting soft lines across the wall. My apartment was quiet. No voices arguing, no tension hanging in the air, just stillness. I reached for my phone and turned it back on. The notifications came in all at once. Missed calls from my mom, 2 from my dad. A message from the family group chat that I hadn't opened yet. I stared at the screen for a moment, then set the phone down without reading anything. For years, my mornings had started with emotional damage control, anticipating reactions, preparing explanations, trying to keep the peace before the day even began. This morning was different. I made coffee, slow, deliberate. I stood by the counter and watched the steam rise from the mug, grounding myself in something real and immediate. My birthday had passed, but whatever shift had happened the night before hadn't faded with sleep. It felt permanent. Later that afternoon, I finally opened the group chat. My mom had written a long message, paragraphs of disappointment dressed up as concern. She talked about respect, about family unity, about how hurt they were by my behavior. My dad added a shorter message underneath. You owe us an apology. I read both without reacting. What stood out wasn't the words themselves. It was what was missing. There was no acknowledgement of my birthday, no recognition of why I was hurt, no apology for laughing, no accountability at all, just consequences and control, dressed up as parenting. I closed the chat. A few minutes later, my sister Brielle messaged me directly. "Why are you doing this?" She wrote. "You're making everything awkward." I stared at her message longer than the others. Brielle had always benefited from the system without ever questioning it. To her, this wasn't cruelty. It was normal. My discomfort was an inconvenience. "I'm not doing anything to you," I typed back. "I'm just done pretending." She didn't reply. The rest of the day passed quietly. I went to work, answered emails, focused on small tasks that didn't ask anything of my emotions. More than once, I caught myself waiting for the guilt to hit. It never did. That evening, Zara came over with takeout and sat with me on the couch. She didn't ask for updates. She just existed beside me, her presence steady and uncomplicated. At one point, she glanced at me and said, "You know they're probably going to escalate." "I know," I replied. "And you're okay with that?" I thought about it for a moment. "I'm okay with not shrinking anymore." She smiled softly. "That's different." Later that night, my phone buzzed again. Another message from my dad. "If you keep this up, don't expect us to help you in the future." I read it once, then I deleted it. Because somewhere between being laughed at on my birthday and being threatened for telling the truth, I had crossed a line I wasn't willing to step back over. I wasn't cutting them off. I was stepping back. And for the first time, that felt like an act of self-respect, not rebellion. The next few days passed without any dramatic confrontations, but the tension didn't disappear. It settled instead, like a low hum in the background of everything I did. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt it in my chest before I even looked. My parents didn't call anymore. They switched tactics. Relatives started reaching out. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in years sent a message asking if everything was okay at home. A cousin commented vaguely on my post about how family matters should stay private. None of them asked what had actually happened. They didn't need to. They had already chosen a version of the story that made them comfortable. I ignored most of it. What surprised me was how easy that became. Without the constant pressure to respond, to explain, to defend myself, my days felt lighter. I hadn't realized how much emotional energy I'd been spending just managing my parents' reactions until I stopped doing it. One evening after work, I went for a long walk through my neighborhood. The air was cool, the sidewalks busy with people heading home, couples talking quietly, kids riding bikes. Ordinary life unfolding all around me. I thought about my childhood, about how I learned early to be low maintenance, to celebrate myself quietly, to succeed without making too much noise. I had told myself it was maturity. Now I saw it for what it was: adaptation, survival. That night, my mom finally called again. I stared at her name on the screen, debating whether to let it ring. Eventually, I answered. "Hello?" Her voice was softer than before, controlled, careful. "Nia, we need to talk." "We've been talking," I said calmly. "No," she replied. "You've been shutting us out." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "I've been protecting myself." She sighed. "You're overreacting. It was one dinner." "It wasn't," I said. "It was my birthday, and it wasn't the first time." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're punishing us." That sentence told me everything. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm just not pretending anymore." Her tone sharpened. "You're tearing this family apart." I closed my eyes. I didn't create this dynamic. I just stopped absorbing it. She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was cold again. "If this is how you're going to be, don't expect things to stay the same." I almost smiled. They already haven't. I said. When I hung up, I didn't feel shaken. I felt settled. Because somewhere along the way, I had accepted a hard truth. My parents weren't upset because I was wrong. They were upset because I was no longer convenient. And that realization changed how I saw everything that came next. The following weekend came and went without any invitation from my parents. No makeup dinner, no belated cake. Not even a text acknowledging that the day had passed. In a strange way, that hurt less than I expected. I had spent so many years clinging to the idea that if I just waited long enough, if I stayed reasonable and patient, things would eventually balance out. That they would notice. That they would try. Watching them do nothing at all made something painfully clear. They weren't confused. They weren't forgetful. They were comfortable with the way things were. I stopped checking my phone as often. When I did, it was usually a message from Zara, or a friend from work, or someone asking how my week was going. Ordinary conversations. Normal concern. The kind that didn't come with conditions. One night, Zara and I sat on the floor of my apartment eating leftovers straight from the containers. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You know," she said, "I think this is the first time I've seen you not apologizing for existing." I laughed quietly. "Is it that obvious?" She nodded. "You used to soften everything, even when you were right." I thought about that later, after she'd gone home. About how often I had minimized myself just to keep the peace. How many moments I had let slide because confronting them felt worse than carrying the hurt alone. A few days later, my dad sent another message. "We're disappointed in the choices you're making." I read it once and felt nothing. Not anger, not guilt, just distance. I didn't respond. That was when something shifted again. Not externally, but inside me. I stopped waiting for their reaction. Stopped trying to predict what they would do next. I started making decisions without factoring in how they might feel about them. I signed up for a professional development course I'd been putting off because it conflicted with family events that rarely happened anyway. I started spending more weekends with people who didn't make me feel like an afterthought. I filled my calendar with things that belonged to me, and slowly, quietly, my parents moved from the center of my emotional world to the edges. Then one evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a message that felt different. It was from my mom. "We need to talk, in person." I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar tension try to resurface. But this time, it didn't take hold. Because I knew something I hadn't known before. Whatever this conversation was going to be, I was no longer walking into it hoping to be chosen. I didn't answer my mom right away. Not because I was afraid of what she'd say, but because I wanted to be honest with myself first. For so long, I had rushed into conversations with my parents, trying to fix things before they could break any further. This time, I needed to know what I was walking into. The next morning, I replied with a single sentence. "We can talk. Let me know when." Her response came almost immediately. "Tomorrow afternoon, at our place." I read it twice. The location wasn't an accident. Their house had always been their territory. The place where they set the tone, controlled the conversation, and reminded me, subtly or not, of my role in the family. I agreed anyway, not because I felt obligated, because I wanted to see something for myself. The next day, I drove over in silence, the radio off, my thoughts steady. I noticed how different it felt this time. No rehearsed apologies, no mental list of compromises, just clarity. When I pulled into the driveway, everything looked the same. The trimmed hedges, the quiet street, the front door I had walked through hundreds of times growing up. Inside, my parents were already seated at the dining table. Brielle wasn't there. That alone told me this conversation wasn't about healing. It was about control. My mom gestured for me to sit. I did. "We're worried about you," she began, folding her hands together. "This behavior isn't like you." I almost smiled. "It is." "You're just seeing it clearly now." My dad leaned back in his chair. "You've embarrassed this family." I nodded slowly. I told the truth. If that's embarrassing, that's not on me. My mom's expression tightened. "You didn't have to post anything." "I didn't have to lie either," I said calmly. She inhaled sharply, then shifted tactics. "We've always supported you." I met her eyes. "No, you supported me when it was easy, when it didn't interfere with Brielle." Silence stretched across the table. My dad broke it. "You're holding on to resentment." "I'm holding on to reality," I replied. "There's a difference." My mom shook her head. "You're tearing the family apart over one night." I leaned forward slightly. "I'm responding to years. The birthday was just the moment I stopped pretending." They looked at each other, then back at me. I could see it then, the confusion. Not because they didn't understand what I was saying, but because it wasn't working the way it used to. My mom's voice softened. "We can move past this, but you need to meet us halfway." I took a breath. "Halfway to what?" "To keeping things private, to taking the post down, to not making us look bad." There it was. I sat back. "That's not moving forward. That's going backward." My dad's jaw tightened. "If you don't let this go, things are going to change." I nodded. "They already have." For the first time, neither of them had a response ready. And in that quiet moment, I understood something important. They didn't invite me there to listen to me. They invited me there to see if I would still fold. I left their house without raising my voice. That alone felt like a small victory. As I walked back to my car, I noticed how my body felt different than it used to after conversations like that. Normally, I would be shaking, replaying every sentence, wondering what I could have said differently. This time, there was none of that. Just a quiet certainty that the conversation had gone exactly how it was always going to go. They hadn't wanted resolution. They wanted compliance. On the drive home, my phone stayed silent. No follow-up texts, no dramatic calls. It was as if they were regrouping, deciding which pressure point to press next. That night, Zara came over with dinner and listened while I told her everything. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to reassure me. She just let me speak. When I finished, she nodded. "They were testing you." "I know," I said. "They wanted to see if I'd still bend." "And you didn't?" "No," I said quietly. "I didn't." She smiled. "Good." The next few days were quiet again, too quiet. Then the messages started, not directly to me, to other people. An aunt called to tell me my parents were heartbroken. A cousin messaged saying I should be the bigger person. Someone else hinted that my parents were struggling emotionally because of my actions. It was all indirect, carefully worded, designed to make me feel guilty without actually addressing the problem. I listened politely. I thanked them for their concern. And then I did nothing. What surprised me most was how quickly the narrative shifted once they realized I wasn't reacting. The guilt trips lost their urgency. The concerned messages slowed. Without my participation, the drama had nowhere to go. One evening, my mom finally texted again. "We didn't raise you to be this distant." I read it twice. Then I replied, "You raised me to be quiet. I chose distance." She didn't respond. That was when I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Distance wasn't punishment. Distance was information. It showed me exactly how much effort they were willing to make when they weren't being appeased. And the answer, quietly and consistently, was very little. I went to bed that night feeling steady. Not healed, not triumphant, just grounded. Because I had finally stopped negotiating my worth with people who benefited from denying it. Weeks passed. Nothing dramatic happened, and that in itself was revealing. There were no apologies, no attempts at real conversation. Just a quiet withdrawal on my parents' side, as if they were waiting for me to come back first. Waiting for me to feel uncomfortable enough to restore the old balance. I didn't. Life kept moving. Work filled my weekdays. Evenings were calmer than they used to be. I noticed how much mental space I suddenly had when I wasn't constantly bracing myself for disappointment. It was unsettling at first, like learning to walk without a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. Brielle never reached out again. That hurt more than I expected, but it also clarified something I had avoided admitting for a long time. Our relationship had only worked because I had accepted less attention, less consideration, less care. The moment I stopped doing that, there was nothing left to hold it together. One afternoon, my mom sent a photo to the family group chat. A picture of Brielle and my parents at a restaurant. Smiling, glasses raised. The caption read, "Family dinner." I looked at it for a long moment. A month ago, that would have gutted me. I would have stared at the image, wondering what I had done wrong, what I could have done differently. This time, I felt something else. Finality. They weren't trying to fix things. They were trying to show me that life went on without me, that I was replaceable, that I had misjudged my importance. And in a strange way, that was freeing. I muted the group chat. That night, Zara and I cooked dinner together in my small kitchen. Music played softly in the background. She laughed when I burned the rice. I laughed too. It felt easy, real. At some point, she looked at me and said, "You're different lately." I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "Lighter," she said. "Like you're not waiting for something to go wrong." I thought about that. I think I stopped hoping they'd become different people. She nodded. "That's a hard thing to let go of." "It is," I admitted, but holding on to it was harder. Later, lying in bed, I thought about my childhood again, about all the times I had told myself that love meant patience, that loyalty meant endurance, that family meant accepting whatever you were given. I understood now that those ideas had kept me stuck. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. Loyalty that demands silence isn't loyalty. And family that only works when you're small isn't family at all. For the first time, I wasn't angry about that realization. I was relieved, because it meant I could finally stop waiting for permission to live my own life. The silence stretched into something permanent. At first, I kept expecting it to break. A call, a message, some sign that my parents were willing to meet me somewhere other than where they'd always stood. But days turned into weeks, and nothing came. And slowly, I stopped waiting. What surprised me most wasn't their absence. It was how much calmer my life felt without the constant push and pull. Without the subtle reminders of where I ranked. Without the quiet competition I never agreed to be part of. I started noticing small things again. How much I liked walking home after work instead of rushing. How I slept better when I wasn't replaying conversations in my head. How my laughter came more easily when I wasn't measuring it against someone else's approval. Zara noticed it too. One evening, we sat on the couch scrolling through photos on her phone. She stopped on a picture from my birthday dinner. The candle, the small cake, the way I was smiling without realizing it. "You look happy here," she said. "I was," I replied. "I didn't even notice at the time." She turned to me. "That's the difference. You weren't trying to earn it." That stayed with me. A few days later, I ran into someone from my extended family at the grocery store. She asked how my parents were doing. Her tone carried that familiar weight, the expectation that I would smooth things over for everyone. "They're fine," I said honestly. She hesitated. "They miss you." I nodded. "I hope they figure out why." She didn't know what to say to that. Neither did I, years ago. As I walked away, I realized something important. Missing someone isn't the same as treating them well. Regret isn't the same as accountability. And distance doesn't always mean loss. Sometimes it means growth. That night, I went through my apartment and made small changes. I moved furniture, cleared out old boxes, took down photos that reminded me of who I used to be. Not out of anger, but out of honesty. I wasn't that person anymore. Later, lying in bed, I thought about my parents again. About the version of me they seemed to prefer. The quiet one. The flexible one. The one who didn't make things uncomfortable. I understood then that they weren't struggling with my boundaries. They were struggling with the fact that I no longer needed their permission. And that realization made something inside me settle for good. It wasn't until a few weeks later that my mom tried one last time. The message came late in the evening, longer than the others. I could tell she'd rewritten it more than once. "We don't recognize you anymore," she wrote. "You've changed. You used to care about family." I read it slowly, then set my phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the city was quiet. A few lights still on. Someone walking a dog. Life continuing, indifferent to my family drama. For a long time, that accusation would have crushed me. "You've changed." It always sounded like a failure. But standing there, I realized something important. I had changed, and that wasn't the insult they thought it was. I picked up my phone and typed carefully, not emotionally. "I still care about family. I just don't confuse family with silence anymore." I stared at the message for a moment, then sent it. She didn't reply. Days passed, then more days. No reaction, no escalation, no apology either. Just nothing. And that was the answer. It wasn't that they couldn't understand me. It was that understanding me would require them to admit something about themselves they weren't ready to face. I talked it through with Zara one night while we were washing dishes together. The water ran, plates clinked softly, ordinary sounds filling the space. "I think they're waiting for you to come back the old way," she said. "I know," I replied, "but I can't unsee what I see now." She smiled. "Good." There was grief in that realization, even if it didn't look like sadness. Grief for the parents I wished I had. Grief for the version of family I kept hoping would show up eventually. But grief isn't the same as regret. I didn't regret standing up for myself. I didn't regret telling the truth. I didn't regret refusing to be laughed at on my own birthday ever again. What I felt instead was resolve. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I wasn't even waiting for closure. I had already made peace with the reality of who they were. And once you stop asking people to be different, you're finally free to decide what kind of life you want to build without them at the center of it. That realization didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly. And it stayed. By the time another month passed, the distance between me and my parents no longer felt raw. It felt settled. Like a door that had closed not with a slam, but with intention. I didn't hear from them again. No birthday makeup plans. No casual check-ins. No attempts to circle back with small talk. And for the first time, I didn't interpret that silence as rejection. I saw it for what it was. They didn't know how to exist in a relationship where I wasn't bending. Life, meanwhile, kept unfolding. I focused more on work. I poured energy into friendships I'd neglected when my emotional bandwidth was constantly drained by family tension. I spent more time with Zara's parents, who never treated my presence like an obligation or a favor. One evening, while sitting at their kitchen table after dinner, Danielle said something that caught me off guard. "You know," she said casually, "you don't have to earn your place with us." I smiled, but my throat tightened. That sentence alone showed me how much I had been carrying. I realized then that what I had lost wasn't a family that nurtured me. It was an illusion I had protected for years because letting it go felt scarier than accepting reality. But now that illusion was gone. And in its place was something quieter, sturdier. Self-trust. I trusted my memory. I trusted my feelings. I trusted the part of myself that knew being laughed at on my birthday wasn't something I should ever excuse. Sometimes, late at night, I still thought about my parents, about what they might say to friends, about how they probably framed the situation. I no longer felt the need to correct the story. People who wanted the truth would see it. People who didn't never would. And that was okay. Because my life was no longer built around proving my worth to anyone who refused to see it. It was built around choosing peace, even when peace meant walking away. And that choice, more than anything else, changed who I was becoming. There's a strange moment that comes after you stop fighting for someone's approval. At first, it feels like loss. Like something important has slipped through your fingers. But then, slowly, you realize it isn't emptiness you're feeling. It's space. Space to think without second-guessing yourself. Space to feel without minimizing it. Space to build a life that isn't constantly interrupted by disappointment. I didn't suddenly become fearless. I still had moments of doubt. Moments where I wondered if I should have handled things differently. If being quieter would have made things easier. But every time that thought surfaced, I remembered my mother's laugh on the phone. My sister's joke about leftovers. The way my parents' anger wasn't about missing my birthday, but about how it made them look. And I knew I hadn't imagined any of it. If you listen to the end, thank you. It means more to me than you know. And before we finish, if you're still here, write in the comments, where are you watching us from? I'll read every message. I didn't lose my family because of a post. I didn't break anything by telling the truth. I simply stopped protecting a version of them that never protected me. And the day I turned 21 wasn't the day I grew older. It was the day I finally grew up. For another story that fits your mood, click the video on the left. To hear the latest one, choose the video on the right.
My phone screamed at 3:07 a.m. I hadn't heard my sister's voice in weeks, but there she was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Rachel, please. I need $18,000. Tonight. Or I'm dead. These people will kill me." My heart pounded against my ribs. Despite everything, the years of being ignored, the cruel comments, the way our mother always chose her, I was ready to help. I was already reaching for my laptop to transfer the money. Then Charlotte made a mistake. She forgot to hang up, and I heard everything. A man's voice low and laughing. "Perfect. She'll pay. Then we disappear." Charlotte's voice sharp and mocking. "Told you. She's always been an easy target." I sat frozen in the darkness. My hands trembled. My chest felt hollow. I ended the call without a word. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just lay there until morning staring at the ceiling. But when the police called the next day, what they told me was worse than anything I'd heard that night. Have you ever discovered that the person you'd die for was plotting your destruction? My name is Rachel Hayes. I'm 35 years old, a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Pennsylvania, and I've been taking care of myself since the day I turned 18. That's not a boast, it's just the truth. When you grow up as the daughter, nobody worries about you. Learn early that the only person you can rely on is yourself. But to understand what happened that night, to understand why my sister's betrayal cut so deep, you need to know what came before. You need to know the kind of family I come from and the kind of woman I became because of them. 10 years ago, I fell in love with a man named David. At least that's what he told me his name was. He was charming, attentive, and made me feel like I was finally visible after a lifetime of being overlooked. I was going to marry him. I was certain of it. Then one morning, I woke up and he was gone, along with $15,000 I'd saved over 3 years. I never told my family. I was too ashamed. I just picked up the pieces and made myself a promise never again. Never trust anyone that completely. Never let anyone get close enough to destroy you. That experience shaped everything about who I am now. I became someone who tracks every dollar questions, every signature documents, every detail. It's why I chose accounting control over chaos. It's why I live alone in a small apartment with no roommates, no boyfriend, no one who could take what I've built. Some people might call that lonely. I call it safe. A few years back, I received a strange letter from a bank I'd never used asking about a credit account I'd never opened. I called them immediately. They told me it was resolved and not to worry. I let it go, but I kept that letter in a folder just in case. Old habits. My sister Charlotte is 4 years younger than me. She's 31 unemployed and has lived off our parents' money for as long as I can remember. Our mother has always protected Charlotte with a fierceness I never understood. Once when I jokingly asked why Charlotte seemed to get away with everything, my mother's face went white. "You don't understand what she started to say. Then she stopped herself and walked out of the room. I never asked again. Charlotte and I have never been close. Behind her sweet smile, I've always sensed something bitter, a resentment she never explained. She has everything our parents can give her, yet she looks at my modest apartment, my stable job, my quiet independence like I've stolen something from her. This past Thanksgiving, the tension was worse than ever. Charlotte spent half the dinner on her phone, then stepped outside to take a call. Through the door, I heard her arguing with someone, a man's voice I couldn't quite place. Something about a deadline. Something about how she doesn't suspect anything. When she came back inside, her face was flushed. I asked if she was okay. Her answer was ice cold. "Mind your own business. Not everything is about you." Our mother watched the whole exchange with anxious eyes. Our father said nothing. He never does. Later, while I was helping clean up, I saw my mother shoving an old cardboard box into the hall closet. "Just old junk," she said quickly, stepping in front of it. But I caught a glimpse of what was inside an envelope with my name on it, what looked like my old Social Security card documents I hadn't seen in years. I didn't push. I never do. But I filed it away in my mind, just like the credit letter, just like every small thing that never quite added up. 3 weeks later, my phone rang at 3:07 a.m., and everything I thought I knew about my family, about my sister, about myself, was about to be ripped apart. The call came at 3:07 in the morning. I know the exact time because I stared at my phone for 3 full seconds before answering, watching the numbers glow in the darkness of my bedroom. Charlotte's name on the screen. My sister, who hadn't called me in weeks, suddenly desperate to reach me in the middle of the night. I answered, and the sound of her sobbing hit me like a wave. She could barely get the words out between gasps. "Rachel, please, you have to help me. I owe people money. Dangerous people. $18,000. If I don't pay them by tomorrow morning, they're going to kill me. I'm not exaggerating. They said they would hurt me. Please, Rachel. Mom and Dad don't have it. You're the only one who can help. You're the only one." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Despite everything, despite the years of being treated like I didn't matter, despite the cruel comments and the favoritism, and the way she looked at me like I was beneath her, my protective instincts kicked in. She was still my little sister. She was still family. I was already thinking about how quickly I could transfer money, which accounts I could pull from, whether my savings would cover it. "Okay," I said, my voice shaking. "Okay, Charlotte, calm down. Tell me where to send it. I'll figure it out." And then I heard it. Her voice shifted. She wasn't talking to me anymore. She was talking to someone else in the room, and she didn't realize the call was still connected. She had pulled the phone away from her ear, thinking she had hung up. A man's voice came through low and confident, almost amused. That was perfect. She bought every word. She'll send the money, and then we take it and disappear. By the time anyone figures out what happened, we'll be long gone. Charlotte laughed. It was a sound I had never heard from her before, cold, triumphant. I told you she would fall for it. She's always been an easy target, too desperate to be needed, too stupid to see what's right in front of her. The man laughed too, and something about his voice, something about the way he spoke felt familiar, a certain smoothness, a certain rhythm. But my mind was racing too fast to place it. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't confront her. Instead, something inside me went very still and very cold. My accountant's brain took over. I opened the voice recorder app on my phone and held it close to the speaker, capturing the last 40 seconds of their conversation before I silently ended the call. I sat in the darkness for a long time after that. My hands were trembling, but my mind was already working. Save the recording. Screenshot the call log. Document everything. I didn't know yet what I was preparing for, but some instinct told me I would need proof. I would need evidence, because whatever was happening, it was bigger than a late-night phone call. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Charlotte was gone. Her phone went straight to voicemail. She didn't respond to texts. She didn't come home to our parents' house. She had simply vanished. But that didn't stop my mother from calling me. She was hysterical, screaming so loud, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Charlotte told us 3 days ago that she was in trouble. She said she was going to ask you for help. She said you were the only one who could save her. And now she's gone. If you refused her, if you turned your back on her and she hurt herself because of you, I will never forgive you, Rachel. Never. I tried to explain. I tried to tell her what I had heard the conversation. Charlotte didn't know I was listening to the man's voice. The plan to take my money and run. But my mother wouldn't let me finish a single sentence. You've always been jealous of your sister. You've always wanted to see her fail. You couldn't stand that she needed you for once, so you let her down. This is your fault. Whatever happens to her is on your hands. She hung up on me. In the background, just before the call ended, I heard my father. He said nothing. He never does. 1 week later, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, calm and professional, introduced herself as Special Agent Sarah Morrison from the FBI's Philadelphia field office. She told me that Charlotte was under federal investigation for involvement in a large-scale investment fraud scheme. Multiple victims across 3 states, approximately $250,000 stolen through fake investment accounts and fraudulent financial instruments. And then she told me something that made my blood run cold. Ms. Hayes, your name and social security number appear on multiple accounts connected to this fraud. Your sister was questioned by our agents 4 days ago. During that interview, she stated that you are the mastermind behind this operation. She claims you forced her to participate and used her identity to hide your own involvement. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt around me. That's not true, I managed to say. I didn't do any of this. I don't know anything about these accounts. I'm not making accusations at this time, Ms. Hayes. I'm informing you that you are currently a person of interest in this investigation. I would strongly recommend that you retain legal counsel. We will be in touch to schedule a formal interview. She hung up, and I stood there in my kitchen phone, still pressed to my ear, trying to understand what had just happened. Charlotte had been questioned by the FBI. She had pointed the finger at me, blamed me for everything. And then she had disappeared knowing exactly what she had set in motion. Within 48 hours, the FBI contacted my company. They requested my employment records, my financial access logs, every transaction I had ever touched. Legal notified HR. And just like that, I was called into my director's office. He couldn't even look at me when he said it. This is just procedure, Rachel. Administrative leave. Pending the outcome of the investigation. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. I packed my desk in silence. 8 years at that company. A spotless record, not a single complaint, not a single error. And now I was walking out like a criminal carrying a cardboard box of personal items while my coworkers pretended not to watch. I was almost at the elevator when someone stopped me. Linda Chen, a woman in her early 60s who had transferred to our department a few years back. I had helped train her when she first arrived. We had eaten lunch together almost every week since then. She pressed something into my hand, a business card, a criminal defense attorney. "I've known you for 8 years, Rachel," she said quietly. "You're the most honest person in this building. Whatever this is, you fight it. And when you need someone to testify about your character, you call me. I mean it." For the first time in days, I felt tears threatening. I wasn't alone, not completely. 2 weeks later, I walked into the FBI field office for my formal interview. I had prepared everything organized, every document rehearsed my answers until I could recite them in my sleep. I was ready to defend myself, but I wasn't ready for what I saw when I walked through those doors. Charlotte was already there, sitting in a conference room down the hall, visible through the glass partition. She looked up as I passed, and our eyes met. She smiled. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting her whole life for this moment. That smile haunted me through every moment of the next 2 weeks. I replayed it in my mind while I prepared for my formal interview, while I organized every document I had, while I practiced my answers until they felt like second nature. Charlotte had looked at me like she had already won, like everything was going exactly according to plan, but she didn't know about the recording. She didn't know that her careless mistake that night had given me the one weapon I needed to fight back. When I finally sat down in the FBI interview room, I was terrified, but I was also ready. Agent Morrison started by showing me Charlotte's statement. My sister had been questioned extensively, and her story was polished, rehearsed, delivered with tears at all the right moments. According to Charlotte, I had always been the controlling one in the family, the smart one, the one who handled finances and made decisions. She claimed I had approached her 2 years ago with an investment opportunity. She said I told her I needed her name on some accounts for tax purposes. She said she didn't understand what she was signing, but she trusted me because I was her big sister. Then came the part that made my stomach turn. Charlotte claimed that when she realized what was happening, she tried to stop it. But I threatened her. I told her that if she said anything to anyone, I would make sure she went to prison instead of me. She said she had been living in fear ever since, too scared to speak up, too scared to go to the authorities. It was a masterpiece of lies. Every word designed to make her look like the innocent victim and me like the villain. Agent Morrison spread documents across the table. Bank accounts opened in my name that I had never seen before. Signatures that looked eerily similar to mine. Loan applications that listed my employer, my salary, my address. Investment accounts promising 15% returns to victims who would never see their money again. The paper trail was devastating. "These signatures," Morrison said, tapping the papers. "They match samples we have of your handwriting." I stared at them, my heart sinking. "I've never seen these accounts. I didn't sign any of this. I swear to you." Morrison's expression gave nothing away. Then she slid a photograph across the table. "Do you recognize this man? He's been identified as your sister's boyfriend and the likely orchestrator of this scheme. Real name, Mark Lawson. Prior fraud convictions in Arizona and Nevada." I looked at the photo, and the room tilted around me. It was him, 10 years older now. A few more lines around his eyes, a little gray at his temples, but the same easy smile, the same warm, calculating gaze that had once made me feel like I was the center of his universe. The same face I had loved with everything I had right before he vanished with my savings and my ability to trust. "Ms. Hayes." "Are you all right?" My voice came out as a whisper. "He didn't just target my sister, he targeted me first, 10 years ago. He stole $15,000 from me." Morrison's eyebrows rose. She made a note on her pad. "You're saying you have a prior history with this individual. I was going to marry him." My hands were shaking now, and I couldn't make them stop. "His name wasn't Mark then. He called himself David. He made me believe he loved me. And then one day he was just gone, along with everything I had saved. I never reported it. I was too ashamed. I thought I would never see him again." The room went silent. Morrison studied me for a long moment. Then she said, "This changes the profile of this case significantly. We need you to tell us everything you remember about him." So I did. every detail I could recall from 10 years ago. And as I talked as Morrison asked questions and made notes, the investigation began to shift. They started digging deeper, and what they found was worse than I could have imagined. The identity theft didn't start with Mark. It started with Charlotte, 6 years ago, 4 years before Mark ever entered the picture. Credit cards I never applied for opened in my name at addresses where Charlotte had lived. A car loan I never signed. Personal loans taken out using my social security number payments, missed accounts sent to collections. All of it traced back to my sister. I remembered the strange letter I had received years ago, the one about a credit account I had never opened. The bank had told me it was resolved. I had let it go. But it wasn't resolved, it was just the beginning. Morrison pulled up more documents. These applications go back years. The signature is similar to yours, but there are inconsistencies. We'll need forensic analysis to confirm, but... I leaned forward, cutting her off. Something had caught my eye. The R. Look at the capital R in Rachel. Morrison looked at me. I always start my capital R from the bottom loop and sweep upward. It's a habit I've had since I was a child. These signatures start from the top and curve down. And the spacing between my first and last name. I leave a consistent gap, exactly the width of 2 letters. I've done it that way my whole life. These signatures are crowded together. There's almost no space at all. Morrison studied the documents, then studied me. You have a good eye. I'm an accountant. Details are my job. Noticing what doesn't match is what I do every single day. She made another note. We'll have a forensic document examiner confirm your observations. But this supports what's becoming clear. You're not the perpetrator here, Ms. Hayes. You're the primary victim. I felt something shift inside me. For weeks I had been drowning, accused, blamed, suspended from my job, abandoned by my family. But now finally someone was listening. Someone was seeing the truth. I took a breath. Then I placed my phone on the table. I have something else, a recording. From the night Charlotte called me asking for money. I played the audio. The room listened in complete silence, Charlotte's voice cold and mocking. She's always been an easy target, too desperate to be needed. Mark's voice confident and cruel. We take the money and disappear. When it ended, Morrison looked at me with something that might have been respect. Pennsylvania is a 2-party consent state for recordings. I know, I've already consulted with an attorney. I kept my voice steady. I didn't record an active conversation. Charlotte failed to disconnect the call. I recorded what was audible from my own phone after the call had effectively ended on her side. My lawyer says it's admissible as supporting evidence, and it corroborates everything else. Morrison almost smiled. You came prepared. I've spent 10 years learning to protect myself. After what Mark did to me the first time, I swore I would never be that vulnerable again. I didn't know what I was preparing for, but I was preparing for something. And after the interview, I sat in my car for a long time. My hands were still trembling, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was fighting back. I picked up my phone and called my father. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious. Rachel. Dad, I need your help. I need to prove I'm innocent, and I need you to finally tell me the truth. I didn't give him time to interrupt. That box Mom hid at Thanksgiving, I know you know what's in it. I know you've been silent about Charlotte for years. I need you to stop being silent now. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion and something that sounded like guilt. Come to the house tomorrow. Come alone. It's time you knew everything. The next morning, my father was sitting on the front porch with the cardboard box in his lap. His eyes were red. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. Your mother doesn't know I'm showing you this, he said quietly. She'll never forgive me for it, but you deserve the truth. He opened the box, and what I saw inside changed everything I thought I knew about my family. Inside that box was my entire identity, my original birth certificate creased and yellowed with age, my social security card, the one I had assumed was lost years ago when I moved apartments, documents I thought had simply disappeared in the chaos of life, but they hadn't disappeared. They had been taken, and beneath those documents stacked in neat piles held together with rubber bands were dozens of letters, all written in Charlotte's handwriting, all spanning years. My father didn't want to show me this at the house. He was too afraid my mother would see. So we sat in his truck parked at a gas station a mile away, and I read through letter after letter while my hands trembled and my world fell apart piece by piece. Letters to aunts and uncles. Letters to cousins I barely knew. Letters to family friends who had known us since we were children. Every single one asking for money. Every single one telling a different lie. Charlotte claimed she had a medical emergency and needed $3,000 for surgery. Charlotte claimed she was escaping an abusive boyfriend and needed money for a security deposit on a new apartment. Charlotte claimed her wallet had been stolen and she needed cash to get through the week. Charlotte claimed she had a job opportunity but needed to pay for training up front. Some of the letters had handwritten notes attached, responses from relatives who had sent money confused and concerned, asking my parents if Charlotte was okay, asking why she needed so much help, asking if something was wrong. "I started collecting these 5 years ago," my father said. His voice was hollow, empty of everything except exhaustion. "Your Aunt May called me one day asking why Charlotte needed $3,000 for a surgery she never had. She had sent the money weeks earlier. Charlotte had cashed the check and never mentioned it again. That's when I realized this wasn't a one-time thing. It was a pattern. It had been going on for years." I flipped through the letters, my stomach churning. "You knew. All this time you knew what she was doing. I knew she was troubled. I knew she was lying to people." He stared out the windshield at nothing. "But your mother can't see it. She won't see it. Every time I tried to bring it up, every time I suggested that Charlotte needed help, real help, she would shut down completely. She would threaten to leave me. She would accuse me of being cruel to a child who needed protection. Charlotte is 31 years old, Dad. She's not a child. To your mother, she'll always be that baby she almost—" He stopped himself. His jaw tightened. I turned to look at him. "Almost what? What were you going to say?" He was quiet for a long time. I could see him wrestling with something, some secret he had carried for decades. Finally, he shook his head. "That's not my secret to tell. But you should ask your mother. After all this is over, when the dust settles, you should ask her why she could never say no to Charlotte. Ask her why she protected her no matter what. The answer might help you understand." He reached into the box and pulled out one more item. My old Social Security card, the one I had searched for years ago and never found. "Charlotte took this from the house 6 years ago," he said quietly. "She told your mother she needed it for a job application, some paperwork thing. She promised to bring it right back." He paused. "Your mother watched her take it. Your mother said nothing when she never returned it. Your mother knew Rachel. She knew, and she covered for her." Something cracked inside me then. It wasn't surprise. I think part of me had always known. But hearing it confirmed, hearing my father say the words out loud, broke something that had been holding together for 35 years. Mom knew. She watched Charlotte steal my identity, and she protected her. My father's silence was the only answer I needed. I took that box of evidence to the FBI the next day, and over the following weeks, the case against Charlotte and Mark collapsed into chaos. But it wasn't the kind of chaos that helped them. It was the kind that destroyed them both. Facing federal charges and the mountain of evidence I had provided, their alliance shattered completely. Charlotte's lawyer tried a new strategy. He argued that she had been groomed and manipulated by a professional con artist. Mark had threatened her, the lawyer claimed. He had controlled her through fear. She was a victim of domestic coercion, not a willing participant. Mark's lawyer fired back with a different story entirely. They had recovered text messages from cloud backups, conversations between Mark and Charlotte spanning months, messages where Charlotte bragged about having access to her sister's identity for years, messages where Charlotte suggested they go bigger, use my clean credit history for investment fraud instead of just credit cards and small loans, messages where Charlotte called me the golden child who deserved to lose everything. The prosecution presented both narratives to the judge during the preliminary hearing. In the end, it didn't matter who had manipulated whom. It didn't matter who started it or who pushed it further. Both of them were demonstrably guilty. Both of them were going to prison. I sat in the courtroom that day, watching from across the aisle. My mother was there too, sitting behind Charlotte, still believing somehow that her baby was innocent. When the judge laid out the evidence, when the full scope of what Charlotte had done became undeniably clear, my mother fainted. just collapsed in her seat. My father caught her before she hit the floor. I watched it happen. I didn't move to help. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt a strange, cold clarity. Like I was finally seeing my family for exactly what it was. The formal charges came down a few weeks later. Mark Lawson faced 12 federal counts, including wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, and conspiracy. Given his prior convictions in other states, prosecutors recommended 8 to 10 years in federal prison. Charlotte faced 7 counts, including identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. That last charge was added specifically because of her attempt to frame me. Prosecutors recommended 4 to 5 years. Agent Morrison called me personally to deliver the news I had been waiting months to hear. "You've been officially cleared, Ms. Hayes. You're no longer a person of interest." The forensic document analysis confirmed all the signatures were forged. The IP addresses for every fraudulent account traced back to locations where Charlotte and Mark lived. "You're a victim, legally, officially on the record." I thanked her. I hung up, and I sat in my apartment in complete silence for an hour, just breathing. Then I called HR and requested reinstatement. My company took me back. My director apologized in person, awkwardly but sincerely. He said they should have trusted me. He said they were sorry for how it was handled. I nodded and accepted his apology because there was nothing else to do. Linda was waiting at my desk on my first morning back. She had bought a small plant with a ribbon tied around the pot. "Told you," she said with a smile. "Most honest person in the building." I smiled back. It felt strange on my face. I hadn't smiled in months. That evening, my credit monitoring service sent an alert. My credit score had been corrected. The fraudulent accounts were being removed one by one. 7 years of invisible damage slowly being undone. I wasn't celebrating, not yet. The trial was still ahead. Charlotte and Mark hadn't been sentenced, and my family was a wound I didn't know how to heal. My mother still wasn't speaking to me. My father called sometimes short conversations full of things neither of us knew how to say, but I was standing. After everything they had done to me, I was still standing. 2 weeks before the sentencing hearing, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten. The return address was the Federal Detention Center where Charlotte was being held. I recognized her handwriting immediately. "I need to see you one more time. There's something I have to tell you. Something about Mom, about why I became this way. You deserve to know the whole truth, even if you hate me after. Especially if you hate me after. Please, Rachel, just once." I read that letter 3 times. I sat with it for 2 days, turning the words over in my mind. Then I requested a visitation appointment. The federal detention facility was cold and gray, everything designed to strip away any sense of comfort or warmth. I sat in the visitation room for 20 minutes waiting, wondering if I had made a mistake by coming. Part of me wanted to leave before Charlotte was even brought in, but I stayed. I needed to hear what she had to say. I needed to understand, even if understanding changed nothing. When they finally brought her in, I barely recognized her. Charlotte looked smaller somehow, older. The confidence that had always sharpened her features, that smug certainty that she was better than everyone else, had crumbled into something hollow and broken. She sat down across from me, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I didn't think you'd come," she finally said. "I almost didn't." She nodded, her hands folded on the table between us, fingers twisting together nervously. "I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone, not even Mark." She took a shaky breath. "When I was 7 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night. I heard Mom crying in the kitchen. She was on the phone with someone, Grandma, I think. And she was saying things, terrible things. She said she couldn't do it anymore. She said 2 kids was too much. She said she had already signed the papers." Charlotte's voice cracked. "She was going to give me away, Rachel. She was going to let strangers take me." I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "She said she couldn't afford me. She said you were easier because you were older. You didn't need as much. But me..." Tears were streaming down Charlotte's face now. "I heard every word. I was 7 years old, and I heard my mother say she was going to throw me away like I was nothing. I remembered my mother's strange comment years ago, that moment when she had stopped herself mid-sentence. You don't understand what I almost did. Now I understood. She changed her mind, Charlotte continued. Obviously. I'm still here, but I never forgot what I heard that night. I spent my whole life waiting for her to change it back. Every time she bought me something, every time she defended me, every time she chose me over you, I thought she was making up for almost throwing me away. And I was terrified that if I ever stopped being her favorite, if I ever stopped being special, she would finally do it. She would finally get rid of me. Charlotte looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. So I made sure I was always the one who needed her most. I made sure you were always the one she could ignore, because if she ever had to choose between us, I needed her to choose me. Every single time. I couldn't survive being abandoned again. I sat in silence, letting her words sink in. Something in my chest ached, but not for myself. For the first time, I felt something like pity for the terrified 7-year-old girl who had built a lifetime of destruction on one overheard phone call. You were a child, I finally said. What you heard was traumatic. I understand that. A flicker of hope crossed Charlotte's face. But you're not a child anymore, I continued. You've been an adult for over a decade. You chose to steal my identity. You chose to frame me for crimes I didn't commit. You chose to let me lose my job, my reputation, potentially my freedom, just to save yourself. Those weren't the choices of a scared little girl. Those were the choices of a grown woman who decided her sister's life was worth destroying. I stood up. I hope you find peace someday, Charlotte. I genuinely hope you get the help you need. But I can't give you forgiveness. That's something you have to earn from yourself through years of work and change, not through a single conversation. Charlotte's face crumpled. Rachel, please. Goodbye, Charlotte. I walked out without looking back. 2 weeks after the sentencing, my mother called. Her voice was small and tentative, nothing like the woman who had screamed accusations at me months earlier. She asked if we could meet just the two of us. She said she needed to explain. I agreed, but on my terms. A coffee shop. Public. Neutral ground. She looked like she had aged 10 years. She could barely meet my eyes when she sat down across from me. Charlotte told me what she said to you about what she heard when she was 7. I nodded and waited. It's true. Her hand shook around her coffee cup. 30 years ago, we almost gave her up. Your father had lost his job. We were 3 months behind on rent. We couldn't feed 2 children. I called an adoption agency. I signed the preliminary paperwork. She took a ragged breath. And then the night before the home visit, I went to check on Charlotte in her crib. She was awake looking at me with those big eyes, and I realized I couldn't do it. I tore up the papers. I never spoke of it again. But Charlotte heard you. My mother's face contorted with pain. I didn't know. Not for years. I just thought she needed extra love, extra protection. I spent 30 years trying to make up for something I almost did, and in doing that, I abandoned the daughter I already had. Yes, I said quietly, you did. She flinched at my words. When Charlotte took my documents 6 years ago, you saw her. You knew what she was doing, and you said nothing. Every time I thought about confronting her, I remembered that night. I remembered almost giving her away. I told myself just this once, just let it go, I'll deal with it later. There was no later. No, there wasn't. And you paid for every single one of my choices. I was silent for a long moment watching my mother cry. Then I spoke. I don't forgive you. I may never forgive you. What happened to Charlotte was terrible, but what you did to me was a choice. You made that choice every day for 30 years, but I'm not cutting you out completely. If you want to be part of my life, it will be different. We start from zero. No more lies. No more choosing Charlotte over me. And you get therapy to deal with what you've been carrying. You'd give me that chance. I'm giving myself that chance. I'm the one who decides whether to let you in, and I'm the one who decides how much. The sentencing hearing was efficient. Charlotte received 4 years in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, and $127,000 in restitution. Mark received 9 years and $380,000 in restitution. When the judge read the sentences, I sat in the gallery. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply breathed. 1 year later, I sat in my new corner office, senior manager. On my desk were 2 photographs. An old family portrait placed face down, and a new photo of me with Linda and colleagues at my promotion dinner, smiling like I meant it. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother asking if she and Dad could visit next weekend. I typed back, "Okay, but just coffee, my place, my terms. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting back. It's walking forward with your boundaries clear and your life finally in your own hands. I had spent 35 years being invisible. I had learned the hard way that the people who were supposed to protect me had failed, but I had also learned something else. I could protect myself, and that was enough. Rachel's story reminds us of something we often forget. The people who are supposed to love us the most can sometimes hurt us the deepest. Family is not just about blood. It is about respect, honesty, and treating each other with dignity. When those things are missing, no amount of shared history can make up for the damage. If there is one lesson we can take from what Rachel went through, it is this: protecting yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. Too many of us, especially women, have been taught to put everyone else first. We are taught to forgive quickly, to keep the peace, to sacrifice our own well-being for family harmony. But Rachel's story shows us what happens when we ignore the warning signs, when we dismiss the small things that don't add up, when we trust blindly instead of trusting wisely. Pay attention to the details. Trust your instincts. Document everything when something feels wrong. These are not signs of paranoia. They are signs of wisdom. Rachel survived because she had spent years learning to protect herself. She kept that strange credit letter. She recorded that phone call. She noticed the differences in those forged signatures. Those small habits saved her life. And here is another truth this story teaches us: forgiveness is not required for healing. Rachel did not forgive her sister. She did not fully forgive her mother. And that is okay. Forgiveness is a personal choice, not an obligation. What matters is that Rachel set boundaries. She decided what she was willing to accept and what she was not. She took control of her own story instead of letting others write it for her. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, if you have ever been the one expected to give while others only took, know that you are not alone. Your feelings are valid, your pain is real, and you have the right to build a life that belongs only to you. Thank you for listening today. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone in your own life, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Leave a comment below telling us what you think. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you find strength to move forward? We read every comment, and your stories matter to us. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment in the story has touched your heart, brought you some reflection, some emotion, and hope. Thank you for taking the time to experience it with us, and hope that each next story will always accompany you on your life journey.